All right, and with that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Greg.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. And welcome back to those of you who had attended last week's session. If we can ask you please to put yourself on mute, we'd appreciate that, just to avoid background noise. So we have a full session planned today, and so if we can actually, Jackie, pull up the excuse me, pull up the PowerPoint and just do a quick review of the agenda, that would be great.
Okay.
Okay, very good.
So I'll start, I guess, Greg, or yeah.
Yes, but the agenda, today's agenda, there you go. Okay, go ahead.
All right. I want to say welcome back to everyone, and welcome to our new attendees as well. I just want to say a few words about our last session, just a couple of brief points of what we discussed and what was presented. We looked at the family literacy and why it's important, particularly in relation to research that's been done in the area. We looked at some family literacy models and practice settings. In our last session, we looked at some facets of successful family literacy programs. And then we also had a local guest presenter, Alejandro Garson, who's a program manager with the Glades Family Education Program with Palm Beach County. With that, we'll talk a little bit about today's session. So first, we'll start with some of the parent-child activities in family literacy, talk a little bit about why early literacy is important. Greg is going to lead some information about adult education and family literacy. We may have a guest presenter from Broward County Public Schools as well. We're going to talk a little bit about collaborations and partnerships, and Greg is going to lead that. We hope to have more time for breakout rooms today for discussions. Particularly, we'll talk about different partnerships. So partnerships in terms of funding partnerships, but also program development. What partnerships might be needed for you, where you are, and how can we help with that? So that will be part of our breakout rooms. Greg is then going to speak about funding sources, and then we're going to wrap up. Okay. So I'm going to start then with talking about early literacy activities and, of course, why they're important. We know that reading equals decoding and comprehension. And so we look at some of the early literacy activities in our family literacy programs. We see that they foster early literacy development. We look at rhyming games and songs, for example. That's linked to phonological awareness and phonological development in young children, which is part of the decoding part of being able to read. We know that oral language interactions can support reading. There's been a lot of research on that, connections between building children's early talk and early reading development. Storytelling fosters emergent literacy skills. Storytelling, as you know, is structured more similar to print versus oral language conversation between a parent and a child, just a general conversation. And so we see some links to children's comprehension development in reading when they have been interacting or exposed to storytelling. We know that oral language is the basis of early writing, and that's another reason to build early oral skills with children. We also know that shared reading can support print literacy development. I will say, though, that in family literacy programs I've worked, and what I know about the research is that parents typically don't focus on print unless they're encouraged to. Generally, the focus of shared book reading or reading to children is building comprehension development, building vocabulary, and building oral language skills. Based on the research, they seem to be the most dominant aspects of what children gain when they interact with a parent around a book. And then, of course, focus on vocabulary. We know that vocabulary development is a major determinant of children's comprehension development. And so that's a clear reason on why we would narrow in on, with parents and children, vocabulary, whether it's in a book or outside, building that knowledge. Book reading. We know reading to children, we know when we point to the print that can support their print knowledge in book reading, pointing to the print and of course talking about the print itself, the letters and words in the text. We know that book reading supports rare word vocabulary. There's been some research in the past out of Harvard University that talked about 50% of the rare word vocabulary that children are exposed to comes from being read to. So generally print has more rare words than, oral language or talk that children would be exposed to. There's research that's been done on questioning as well in terms of lower level, moving up to higher levels of questioning and book reading. So we see that, but of course we work in family literacy where children are at, and that goes back to Vygotsky's work, of course, of scaffolding, and that zone of proximal development, starting where they are. And so, our goals are to sort of extend the cognitive development through reading as we move up to higher level questions, but we certainly got to start where children are at. So parent-child literacy interactions, certainly our programs have focused on environmental print, everything from street signs to other types of print in the environment that children see. Shared book reading has been a dominant aspect of many family literacy programs. Rich discussions, the oral, exchanges, particularly talking about items that are not even present. So the decontextualized language when children talk about, experiences that happened in the past. So it's something that, occurred that's decontextualized. And then, of course, engagement in play. There's a lot of research that's come out, particularly the last 15, 20 years on, the importance of play for oral language development. And then we see artwork as well as extensions as a common aspect of many of our family literacy programs. Our program last week that was presented on the Glades Family Education Program, just to give you some examples, they use the rhyme scavenger hunt. So that would build phonological development. So children's knowledge of early sounds, which support decoding. We know as well that story sequencing is another aspect. So looking at this could be something of, and I don't want to speak for the Glades program specifically, but often when we see story sequencing, it could be mixing up pages of the book that are photocopied to put them in order or sentences in order. In other words, looking at the sequence of a story that supports prediction, and prediction supports comprehension development in young children. The IPAL study, that's the Parents as Literacy Supporters in Immigrant Communities. This one was done on the West Coast of Canada. They focused a lot on book interactions. So some of the ones as examples of, as I presented on the last slide, different types of print interactions and questioning. They also focus a lot on play. So building that knowledge of building imagination, building the oral language, which then is a basis for print development. I'm working with the Homestead Family Literacy Program with a colleague of mine, and I can tell you that we started with some questions for parents and so forth. And the feedback we got was that parents weren't engaging in many of the activities in terms of the questioning. And so we changed things, and we changed things because we learned more about the parents from our preschool teachers at Head Start. And they talked about the difficulties parents have with reading some of the books. So then we as we went face to face, because we were online during COVID, we talked about book summaries with the parents, and we talked about the vocabulary in the book to support their reading with the children. And then the parent-child engagement, we looked at art activities or art extension activities where they would engage in some, it was translanguaging, using two languages as they interacted with their child. But it's not that at one point, we will hope to go back to look at some interactions around the book in terms of questioning. But at this point, we start where parents are at. And of course, that is providing a summary of the book so that they understand it as they're working with their child. This is an example of a translanguaging storybook project. It's one based in the schools. This one I pulled out was published in the Reading Teacher. If you have access to, many of the local libraries will have access to this particular reading, and they fully develop with illustrations and so forth what this looks like. But essentially it was a multilingual family storybook workshop. It was based off of a storytelling event that occurred at a school. They then had the parents and children work together through craft materials, crayons, markers, and so forth. There was 4 follow-up sessions. Families had, cross-cultural discussions about the topic they were going to write about and so forth. Students took charge. This was what was really interesting about this one, as opposed to some others where it's often dominated on the parent to do a lot of the scaffolding. The child took the initiative here. So the child was doing a lot of the crafting and of the verbal story as well. Parents did use some translanguaging apps and so forth as they, wrote their stories together. And essentially they found that the project empowered the child as more of an advanced learner as well. It provides certainly respect for the families, the incorporation of the first language, particularly with the school-based program. Some social and cultural appropriateness of literacy interactions, things to look at. I want to mention this first one in particular. There was a program that was done, a family literacy program with parents that James and Carmani did in the US, where they provided books in the home language, which in this case was Spanish, and they had, books with beautiful illustrations. However, parents dropped out of their program. And so they dropped out because even though the books were in the first language and they had beautiful illustrations, the content didn't relate to what the parents wanted to teach their children. And so I mention that because that's so important to, if you are going to use books, then choosing ones that relate, because we are taking time from parents. And of course, we want to make sure that, what's being taught in the books are, or shared in the books is what's of interest to them. I can just speak for the Homestead program I'm involved in. We did ask parents, because some research that I've read with Hispanic parents say that the importance of morals, in terms of if they're going to share read, they'd like to have that as an aspect. And so that's something I brought up to my parents that I have in Homestead. Is this something that would be important? And a lot of the moms, in this case, for the face-to-face was all moms, and they nodded, yeah, that's something that we want to have in the program. Of course, print is only, storybook is just one aspect of a family literacy program. There's many other types of print engagement that can be engaged in, anything from environmental print to advertisements to menus to recipes, advertisements in the community. Many children see these on a daily, weekly basis in some cases. And so it's looking at those other areas as well to build interactions around. Some parents, of course, would be encouraged to tell stories from pictures. In the case of, if I can just briefly share, the teachers at the Head Start were reading the books we provided to the children because they knew it would support, the child interacting with the parent at home. And so when we found that out, we also had feedback from some of the teachers that the teachers were reading the books differently than from the children than how the parents would read them. And so I think what's important to tell parents is that that's fine, that it's telling your own story from the book, because that's we're sort of working where parents are at. And if they can't read the book due to low literacy levels, then telling the books, telling the story from their own pictures is fine. And I think it's important for the parent to be able to tell their child that we can have different meaning from a book. Some cultural groups I've worked with, the home photos become a dominant part, especially for new immigrants, sharing information, engaging in storytelling. We know some cultures, some research on East Indian families, Native American Indian families, and so forth. The dominance would be more in the storytelling. And certainly there's benefits for all children for being exposed to storytelling. Focus on hobbies. I mentioned this one because the work that I've done with fathers, many fathers said to me that they would rather talk about their hobbies or share hobbies with children and their interests than to read to children, particularly as they progress through early schooling. And so that might be a way if you're trying to engage parents and fathers in your program. It might be working with Lego blocks and maybe having to do some reading and writing in association with that in a program. We know that from book reading, it's not just cognitive skills, but there's a social emotional bond that's formed. And so I think it's just being careful based on the research that I'm aware of, that we don't want to necessarily make it a chore to read to a child. We want it to be an enjoyable experience, because the ultimate goal is that we want children to read and we want parents to interact with them. So that's an important key aspect, is that it can be an emotional connection as well, and having it as pleasant as possible. And of course, the translanguaging, we know that the first language can support the second language. It's much easier to teach a new concept than it is to teach a new word for that concept, and that's based on Cummins' work. Some assessments that have been used in family literacy programs in terms of early literacy, and Greg is going to talk a little bit about this with the adult literacy piece. But the test of early reading ability, the TERA, has been used in different programs. The iPals programs I mentioned earlier has been using that. They've used that for about 10 years in their program. A lot of the BPK assessments are also used for early assessments in our programs. Concepts about print, that looks at things like directionality, asking children to point to a letter and, point to a word on the page, point to a capital, those types of things. I've used this with preschool, even though it's standardized from age 5 up, because the goal in a family literacy program wasn't necessarily to compare it to standardized averages. The goal was to see if there's any change. Did they learn being able to point to a letter, or where to start reading in a text, the left, upper left, left-hand side, and so forth. So the assessments can be used for that, to see if there's just general gains versus comparing them to standardized averages. I'm currently with the Homestead program using the Kaufman test for early reading achievement, just using some subsets of that assessment, the language and comprehension, because we're focusing on storybook reading. That tends to be the area where children make the most gains. We're not asking parents to focus on print in my program, so I wouldn't assess them for phonological awareness or phonological development, because likely there's not going to be gains in that area unless the teacher is engaging in some of those practices. So it would be due to that versus, the focus on what we're focusing on, which is sort of more building understanding of the text itself. And then there's some other examples there as well. FLAME is no longer a family literacy program in being currently used, but there's been a lot published on the FLAME program based out of Chicago area. And they've used a lot of the language proficiency tests, and they've also used some of Clay's work, the observation survey, and so forth. The GLADES program uses the phonological awareness literacy screening. That's also known as PALS. I didn't write PALS there because I didn't want to confuse it with the iPals program, but the assessment is also known as PALS. And so GLADES uses that. And they've also used the Get Ready to Read assessment tool. Parent-child interactions. This is harder to evaluate, as you can imagine. I've videotaped parents reading to children and coded the data, looking at questioning and so forth, whether they focused on print, but that would be part of observing or recording parents reading. Certainly interviewing can get at some of the data we're looking for, or having a focus group of 5 or 6 parents together and asking them about the interactions and so forth. And certainly exit surveys, which can be more qualitative if we're looking for just more written description from parents, or more quantitative if we're focusing more on numbers, sort of the number crunching part. With the surveys, I've developed one myself for the Homestead program. I think it really depends on associating your assessment with with what your goals are, and what you're incorporating in the program. Because sometimes using those blanket assessments, if they're not necessarily related, will give you a negative outcome, where the program that you're incorporating might be very positive and have positive outcomes. Okay, I thought I would stop there and see if there's any questions on the early literacy interaction piece.
So we do have a question here in the chat. So this is from Ruth. Can we get some book titles as examples or the websites where we can purchase them?
Yes, I'm happy to share many of the book titles I've used. I consulted with a children's literature specialist for some of those, and again, we modified based on feedback we get. You know, for example, some of the preschool teachers said there's too many words on the page for our parents. You gotta, you know, so that was very helpful to us. And so forth, but I'm happy to share that. I'll certainly share the list that I have that I've used, if that's sufficient. I will say the reading teacher, that journal also publishes, if you're involved in a family literacy program that's throughout elementary schools, every year they publish in the November issue, top books across the United States by grade level, K to 2, K to 3, 4 to 6, and so forth. And they're often ranked by students give input on those. And so it's always a good bet, but I'm happy to share further information, after on that.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions in the chat right now.
Okay, thank you. Well, feel free, I mean, as the session goes on, or if you have further questions, please let us know. So we'll go back, I guess, at this point to Greg is going to lead us through the
Okay.
adult literacy piece.
Sounds good. And can you all see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So I know, and thank you for that, Jackie. That was very illuminating. I know most of the folks who have signed up for this and participating in this are from the adult education and literacy side of programming. And so, but we do have a few people who are not in that world. So I wanted to just talk for a few minutes about sort of the adult education providers here in Florida, sort of our traditional system of adult education literacy and English for speakers of other languages programs. So we have 4 sort of areas. We have nonprofit organizations that are either solely focused on adult education literacy or have that as a component of what they offer. Libraries, depending on the areas of the state, all libraries, of course, are supportive of literacy, but some of them actually do direct programming. And I know we have some library representatives as well as community-based nonprofits here on the session today. School districts are the largest provider network in our state. School district-based programs, adult basic education, ESOL, they sort of run the gamut in terms of what they're offering. And then state and community colleges, and really often sort of locally is decided whether it's a school district or state and community college. In some counties, there are both, but these are often referred to as LEAs, local education agencies, and they offer, again, a wide range of adult education services. Now, there are family literacy programs in all of these different programming areas, and if you are interested in learning more about what services are available in your community, we're certainly happy to help you out with that. At FLC, we have a referral network, and we, if you give us a call or drop us an email, we'd be happy to do a direct introduction. So moving on, unless there's any questions on that, I want to talk a little bit about adult education and how programs can sort of uniquely customize what they're offering to be suitable in a family literacy setting. And there's really some great opportunities to do that. In sort of the first area, maybe first and foremost, is the opportunity to use children's books and children's literature as part of your teaching curriculum. And this is not something that you typically do in adult education programs. Using children's books, might be misconstrued, but in this setting, it's very appropriate, and you're able to have a wide selection of materials that are written at a low level in terms of grade level, very accessible, lots of images, for all the reasons why it's great for children to use children's books when they're learning to read. A lot of that applies to adults as well. So if you're using these books and they're reading these books to their children, and if you have an opportunity, it's always great when you're able to actually give books to families and they can bring them home and read them. And you can also build activities, as Jackie alluded to in her session. So that's a huge advantage that adult education programs have when it comes to providing instructional services. The other advantage that is often cited in family literacy programs is that it's an opportunity to attend class and have childcare provided. And my experience in starting a family literacy program in Virginia was that, and I've heard this from others as well, that often in the beginning, parents and caregivers really see this as an opportunity to attend a GED class or literacy or ESL class and have childcare provided for them to be able to do that. And so they don't necessarily understand sort of the full concept, and that's okay, and that's absolutely fine. I think once they get into the program, they can understand sort of the fuller aspect of what's trying to be achieved here, but it certainly is a great marketing tool to be able to offer childcare as part of the services, and then when they learn that it sort of goes beyond childcare and they're really engaging kids in very beneficial activities, as well as the pack time piece, it's all the better. But just from a sort of initial promotional piece, that childcare piece can be a great seller for your program. Talking with parents about what they can do to support their children's educational development. And this is an opportunity to do parent education in a way where you're sharing why it's important to read to your children and giving parents tips on how to do that and how to engage your children, and how important it is to talk to your children in terms of vocabulary development and to be engaged in their schooling and be connected to their teachers and all the kinds of things that really lend to supporting a child's success in school. And so that's an opportunity, very appropriate in adult education, to talk about those opportunities and really share valuable information with regard to their children's developmental process. Project-based learning. We're big proponents of project-based learning at FLC. We have health and family literacy initiatives that really focus part of the program on doing projects, and project-based learning is very appropriate for family literacy, and you can come up with, and programs have come up with, very interesting and beneficial projects where parents and children working together can do some really interesting things. And of course, you have the great benefit of having something to show for it at the end, and you can share with other folks in your program, or maybe in the wider school or community. Modeling, and this is a piece that we don't talk about too much, and it's sort of a silent motivator, I guess, but when there is some research that shows, and I think it's just to a certain degree a common sense factor, that when children see their parents engaged in schooling, when they're sort of walking the walk, and instead of just talking about how important education is, that they're actually in there and participating with the children, then there's huge benefits that come from that. And family literacy, as was mentioned at our last session for the Glades program, when you can build into what you're doing opportunities to have fun and do interesting activities and do field trips. And so family literacy really lends itself to an opportunity to build community within the school. As the parents get to know one another, the children get to know one another. It's really an opportunity. Sometimes the folks who participate, and we hear this a lot on ESOL programs, that that parents feel sort of isolated. They've moved to this country, they're not familiar with the community, they don't know anybody, and this is a real opportunity to sort of build community, as is the case with ESOL programs. But I think it's even more tight-knit in some cases with family literacy, because you have parents of young children, so they have that in common, and they're doing lots of activities with their children to make it light and fun and productive. So there's lots of good opportunities there, and all of these sort of fit under the spectrum of family literacy, but sort of provide an opportunity to tailor make your adult education curriculum. And there's some good curriculum out there that really does focus on family literacy themes that you can use as part of this process. I want to talk a little bit about developing partnerships as well. So we talked a bit about adult education providers, and of course, those of you who are not adult education providers, we certainly encourage you to reach out to folks who are providing adult education as part of your program development. And then for adult educators, there's a lot of different options, and I think most of these you're probably familiar with, but I wanted to mention VPK. It's a big initiative here. Preschool programs in Florida. Head Start is part of that VPK network, Head Start and Early Head Start. And there is an emphasis in Head Start on parent engagement. So this can be a really good fit for a lot of VPK and Head Start programs. Elementary schools, of course, and family literacy programs typically have children who are pre-K through grade 3 or 4. But that said, I do think it's important, or at least you should take into consideration making opportunities for older siblings to be involved as well. So this kind of gets into sort of how you're going to offer programming. So if you're offering programming during the day, well, when older siblings are in school, that may not be a factor. But if you're looking at an evening program, a late afternoon after school program, then that'll be a consideration for folks. You know, it's not going to be very practical to bring their 3-year-old but leave their 9-year-old at home, kind of thing. So programs have gotten creative in this and created opportunities for older siblings to participate, activities for them, as well as opportunities for them to be helpers and have other roles where they're helping with the program. So elementary schools, or even beyond, may be part of the equation in terms of partnerships, especially when it comes to families that have children at the VPK elementary and middle school level. Usually by high school, they're probably old enough to kind of stay at home themselves. In Title I schools in particular, by design or by the nature of who they serve, are often very good potential partners. Libraries, of course, libraries are always promoting literacy, and many of them do have some sort of children's programming that is going on with parents involvement to some degree. A lot of times it's more sort of reading enrichment or story time kinds of things, and there may be a real opportunity to expand on what they're doing and partner with local libraries. And then after school programs and other youth-focused nonprofits, and I've listed some here, YMCAs, Hippie, and we do have one program under our health literacy that is a Hippie program. I'm somewhat familiar with it. Although Jackie, I believe you're a little bit more familiar than I am. Can you speak a little bit to Hippie?
Yeah, just very briefly, but it's a home visiting program. USF, I believe, has a training base in Florida for the Hippie program. There might be people on this call from there as well, but essentially it's a home-based, and it's almost train the trainer as well, where some of the participants become trainers in the program itself. but the focus tends to be on the shared book reading interactions. I mean, it's broader than that, but it certainly is an important piece of the Hippie program. I could say more if anybody wants further information about it later, but.
Sure. Okay, thank you for that. Reading Pals, Reach Out and Read are two other programs that focus on early childhood reading. Reach Out and Read tends to work with medical practitioners, but they've done some work beyond that, and I think they would definitely be a great opportunity, provide a great opportunity for partnerships. A lot of times from the adult ed side, partnering with organizations like this, you're not only bringing the expertise in terms of working with children, but it's also an opportunity to access families in need, and also quite often to provide facilities, because sometimes the adult ed programs are not really set up well in terms of their facilities and insurance related considerations and things of that nature, so that working in an environment that the children are already in an after school type program, or even during the day, but especially after school when they're perhaps not using all the rooms that they'd be using ordinarily during the day, can be a real win-win situation. So with that, I guess Nicole, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe our Kamara Betsy, who is going to speak to us from Broward County, has not joined us as of yet. Is that correct?
No, yeah, I don't see her on the list.
Okay, so we're not sure what happened there. She did confirm she'd be able to do it, but we were having difficulty confirming in the last day or two, getting a final confirmation. So sorry about that. But that'll give us a little bit more time perhaps to talk about partnerships and funders and so forth. With that, at this point, before we move into our small group discussion, just wanted to open it up if anybody has any questions. Do we have any questions, Nicole, so far?
Nope, there are no more questions in the chat. But we do, you do have the ability to unmute yourself, don't forget. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask them.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Do we have anybody on the line who would like to, since we had a little bit of time set aside for Kamara, and I know this is kind of putting you on the spot, but anybody who currently has a family literacy program that they might be willing to share a little bit about what they're doing? Okay, well, we'll move on to our small group discussions. So we're going to break up into small groups, and we want to talk a bit about the partnership piece and really looking at potential program partners. Family literacy really does lend itself to partnerships and collaboration, perhaps even more so than more traditional adult education, because we are working with the family as a whole, and adult educators often don't have expertise in terms of working with children, and that holds true of teachers in the K-12 and pre-K systems with regard to adult education. So it really is an opportunity to work together. I've talked with you a little bit about some of the potential partners, but this would be an opportunity to talk in small groups and kind of really hone in on what you feel could be good potential programming partners who might be involved in sort of developing and implementing a program, as well as funding partners. And we'll talk a little bit about funders here later on, but either providing direct dollars or in-kind resources that could be useful to you in implementing your program. And for those of you who already have family literacy programs, I really encourage you to talk a little bit about some of the partners and partnerships that you currently have. And we can look at collaborators too, and just sort of make the distinction there when collaborators may not be involved with sort of the day-to-day, but promoting your program or making referrals, things of that nature to really kind of support your efforts. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Nicole, to kind of set up the small group piece.
Sure. Yep. That sounds great. So I will go ahead and create and open the rooms in a minute here. So it should be no more than 5 participants per room. Greg, how long did you want to do the breakout session for?
I think we could do 15 minutes.
All right.
Does that work? Does that sound like it still works, Jackie?
Yeah, I think that's great because
Okay.
at that point, then we have, you're going to speak about some potential funding sources as well.
Right.
So I think 15
Yeah.
would be.
So well, actually, why don't we make it 12 minutes, and we can kind of come back and just do a little bit of a sharing session, perhaps if anybody has anything to share from their groups. So can you set it for 12 minutes?
Okay, so the breakout rooms will be open for 12 minutes and then it will give you a 60-second countdown to leave the room once it's done. All right, so let's go ahead and open. All right,
Okay,
so
great.
now you should have gotten a notification to join your rooms. If you don't see a notification, you might have to go to the little more button at the bottom of your screen. And Greg and Jackie, you are welcome to jump around in the rooms.
Okay, great. Okay, see y'all.
All right, for those of you who maybe haven't joined a room yet and you're having trouble, the button at the bottom of your screen that says more should allow you to see the breakout rooms, and you should be able to join a room that way. Perfect. All right, we still have a few people here. So Jacqueline, Ashley, and Rocio, if you would like, you can join the rooms. It's rooms 1, 2, 3, and 4. So you should have been assigned a room. So please join the rooms that you see.
I'm going into a new position in a couple of weeks, and this would be part of it.
I think somebody in this room asked for my help. Nancy, is that you? Are you having trouble?
I think she is. She kind of blacked out in the middle of us speaking.
Oh, okay.
If she's not able to get on or if it threw her off, I'm not really sure. She didn't say anything.
Okay, and Nancy, when you have the chance, can you shoot me an email? Shoot me an email with your problem if you can hear me. All right, sorry, sorry about the interruption. I'll leave
that's
you guys
okay.
to it.
No, if you have a second, Nicole.
Yeah.
Both Zenobia and I are where we're starting out with the family literacy. We do have family literacy that falls under our community literacy grant, but
Okay.
it's not anything to this level.
Okay.
We are partners with Head Start, and
Okay.
we are housed in a library. So we have like the bilingual story time that we do monthly. And through that, the activities that we promote through the family literacy table, and also we send out resources and activity packets like to our Head Start, but
Okay.
that's the extent of it. I do also work for the schools, and I am familiar with their ELL program that they offer, but not to this capacity, not to the point where they actually incorporate family activities, which
Okay.
is a really great idea for both them and us.
Yes.
And that's why I'm trying to get more information, not only funding, but also the activities, the books that they use, and, more information on how they actually incorporate it.
Right. So so our grant is actually going to be available for family literacy programs who are already in existence. And if you wish to expand, you would be a perfect candidate for our grant, frankly. So I would highly recommend you apply for it. It is a planning grant. So all of these questions that you have, we can pay you guys to do that research through this grant. And then, well, there are other funding sources, but we'll get to that.
In a minute.
We'll get to that in a little bit.
Okay.
But yeah, those are the very questions we are encouraging you guys to kind of pursue and figure out the answers to.
Right. Yeah. Cause I mean, like I said, this is the first time that I've heard about it is through the webinar. And then also, like I said, that would be a great deal because we do have so many of the parents that come in when we have the signing in of the kids at the beginning of the school year. And a lot of them, as far as myself, I have to, help in interpreting. And I also try to put in the promotion for the adult literacy program that I work for.
Right.
But I think if we could incorporate both the school and ourselves in family literacy, by having activities like that where the parents are able to come and be a part of it, the learning that their kids have, I think it would probably open up the door to them feeling more comfortable to have their kids help them in the learning process.
Right. Well, yeah, that's a great idea. Nancy, I saw you popped up on the camera for a second. Are you back in? Oh, okay. I can't hear you still, Nancy. Okay. Well, she might be having a problem. All right. Well, I will leave the room, leave you guys to it, and pop in on some other people. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Angela?
Welcome back. All right, we have about 30 seconds. We'll get started shortly. All right, hello everyone, welcome back.
Hello.
Hello, welcome back, everyone.
Hello.
Okay. So any thoughts, any takeaways from that discussion? Anybody want to chime in with anything they felt might be useful to share in terms of partnerships?
Well, Joe Cini, and I definitely think, Greg, as you pointed out, and then Jackie pointed out, and we talked about in our breakout room, the childcare component is gigantic. If we can get that straightened out, hopefully through partnerships with school boards or school districts, I think that goes a long way to doing this.
Yeah. And if you're doing it in partnership with a school that's also allowing you to use their facility, then there's a comfort level with parents. Often, they're familiar with it. We found when we were doing it that a big factor was having the children in the same school. And I don't think there are too many family literacy programs that kind of have separate buildings, but that's very comforting that they have an opportunity to, that they know that the child is just a couple doors away, and they're actually doing shared activities with the children too. So, but yeah, that childcare component can be major. Anybody else?
I just want to say that with the Anderson study that I referenced with childcare, where they did it in the school, the children were able to be pulled out. So the children were, because it was a school-based program, they were in the school. And then there was a room for parents where the facilitators worked with. So they were being pulled out of the classroom and went back in. But it's not a solution to, the broader concerns of childcare in terms of cost. But for people doing it in the school, if schools would be on board with that, that's an option as well. Some time to work with the parent-child together, and then the parents work with the facilitators in a room in the school.
Now, Jackie, Matt Anderson, and maybe Matt, you can chime in here. He mentioned in our meeting that he was potential partners, that he was really having some difficulty convincing them of the importance of working with parents and how that will, in effect, help their children down the line. Is that a correct summary?
Well, yeah, in my area, the vast majority of the funding goes to the child or to schools or to programs, and there's really a disconnect, and it's been a challenge to really get funders and other community resources to kind of see that piece of that, the parent is that first teacher, and if the parent is illiterate, really not going to be promoting literacy in the home, and that's where it starts. So it's been discouraging. I think I'm making baby steps, but I just had a United Way site visit, and the feedback after that, when I didn't get the funding, was a lot of the people in that visit really didn't see that connection, even though I was able to provide a lot of data and research on it.
Anything you want to say on that in terms of making the case, Jackie? I know this is your area of expertise.
Well, I think Matt had mentioned that he did show a lot of research on the importance of the adult literacy piece when you can assist with that. Am I correct with that, Matt, that you shared a lot with United Way on why that was important?
I did, both in my grant proposal, which I think is what got me over the first hurdle, but then when they came out to my facility for the site visit, it's all community on the panel, so to speak, and they in that group had a real difficulty, even though I did give them a quick couple data sheets. It just wasn't enough.
It might be meant sharing further successful programs that have been funded that include the piece, but also it might, because funders decide what they're going to fund, right? We know, and I don't know if there's any, it's a complex process, it depends on the needs and maybe who's on the committee at the time and so forth, right? But essentially it might be working with their goals at the beginning. And then if there's an opportunity to branch out further, once you're funded, then there's some leg room often to make some changes. And that might be an avenue you might want to consider taking. Not that it's not important, it's just in terms of, the decision to get funding or not get funding, and then really working to show how important that is to include the parents.
Well, I think right now, I'm going to pilot a small family literacy program in the county, and I'm hoping that will demonstrate and then also show that there is a need, and I'm hoping that will help.
I think this is Teresa. I just want to add to that, if I may. I think that is a really great idea. And I feel so bad that United Way didn't kind of get it, or that they just put their funding elsewhere, because usually they're quite tuned in to that. I've been in that process in other literacy programs. And I will say that we always had learners there, learners testimonials. So if you start that program and then you have an adult and a child after you've had some success to show and have that person speak, that's really going to hit home. That's United Way really looks for that. So I think your idea to just start, however small even, is key. And then you can, not that we like to parade our learners around, but you can have those folks there giving testimony to how it impacts their family and their child's education and their own lives. Would be a big impact for United Way. Just my 2 cents.
That's good point. I'm going to move on to talk a little bit about funding partners, and so, and this there's a lot of opportunity, I think, here. I think that there is, some issues in adult education are cyclical, and family literacy, I think, is starting to come back into its own. 2-gen is a common term, and when we're looking at 2-gen programming, that's multi-generational programming, and it really can pertain to a whole range of different kinds of programs and services. So family literacy certainly is part of that, but it's much broader than family literacy. So all family literacy programs are 2-gen, but certainly all 2-gen are not family literacy. Looking at the funding sources, I'm just sharing some here. The Florida Department of Education does have funds that they make available. It's usually every 2 years. And so English literacy and civics grants and adult basic education dollars that are available. Now, these are competitive dollars that folks can apply for, and family literacy is one of the allowable programming areas that can be funded. So I'm hoping that they'll strengthen some of the language down the line and encourage folks to perhaps go into that area of programming. But there are currently school districts and state colleges that use these dollars to support family literacy, and Broward County is one of them. The Children's Services Councils and Trusts, and there is a Florida Alliance of Children's Councils and Trusts that has a website, and you can go in and see if there's one in your community. And I'm not an expert on this, but I understand that there's certain councils that are funded directly through a special tax, and they have much more resources than other counties that don't have that set up. But there's a number of them.
A special tax?
Yeah, so they're a taxing entity. So
Okay.
that a percentage of the taxes is targeted or directed to help children's program or help support children's programming. So Palm Beach County, I believe Pinellas County are in that category. There's a number of different counties that do have that, but most of them don't have that particular resource, but still may make funding available. Now, I know we just talked briefly, Matt, you said you've been in communication with your Children's Services Council in your county, and have they been fairly open to the idea of maybe working with you?
They have. They run different 3-year cycles. So one of the categories that they have suggested that family literacy would fall into, it was probably a year or two down the road. But they started a St. Lucie Reads initiative, which I attend, and again, I'm the only one there working with adults. So they're starting to connect the dots and come around. So I definitely suggest if you have one, it's worth checking out. They have money.
And I know the one here in Orange County did work with the Adult Literacy League for a number of years to support a family literacy program. So there are some examples out there of where these trusts and councils, and the Children's Trust in Miami-Dade is a huge one. If you have any programs down in South Florida, have supported family programming, family-focused family literacy programming. Dollar General Literacy Foundation has a family literacy grant. So they offer several different grant opportunities, but they have one that's specifically focused on family literacy, and we'll be providing these links later. Actually, I think, Nicole, you're putting a few links into the chat right now, right?
Yeah, I can put all the links right now.
Okay, and we'll also be sharing a resource later with some with all of these listed. The Wish You Well Foundation, that's a foundation that was started by the author David Baldacci, and it does focus on supporting literacy, including family literacy programs, and they have funded several programs here in Florida. But family literacy, family foundations in general can be a good source of funding for this kind of thing. And we're going to share a little bit later about the Kislak Family Foundation that's making a big investment in family literacy here in Florida. The DKG International Delta Kappa Gamma is a sorority. Actually, I'm going to let you speak to that, Jackie, because you've received some funding from them, correct?
Yeah, that one is geared toward, I guess, women educators. So it's limited to women in education, but I have been funded a small amount, under $1,000. It was small, but it was enough to buy books for the program. So they are open to funding, family literacy as part of their program.
So sororities, fraternities, service organizations, I certainly haven't listed them all here, but and I think Rotary has supported literacy over the years. There's opportunities with different women's organizations. There's a variety of different opportunities at the local level, and usually, if you're looking to companies and your local family foundations, really your best sources of funding usually are local. I'm sharing some here that are sort of beyond sort of a local focus, including the New World's Reading Initiative. Now, I don't know how many folks have heard about this, but this is not a funding source in the traditional sense, but it certainly would be something that I highly encourage you to tap into as a resource for the families in your program. And even if you don't do family literacy, if you have parents of small children, let them know about this. So the state legislature allocated a large sum of money, tens of millions of dollars. I think it was over $20 million to purchase books. Part of it was with CARES Act money, and they also have a business tax credit that is funding this. So there's a lot of resources and a lot of money behind this initiative to basically make books available to young children. pre-K through 5th grade. And it's sort of modeled, I believe, on the Dolly Parton program, where they send books to children on a monthly basis. So you can go in, give you the link to this, the families can sign up. Now, technically, I think they're supposed to be reading below grade level, but they're not really actually asking that question. And I talked to a program representative who said that they're really not at this point able to kind of verify that. So they're enrolling pretty much everybody who comes into the program. I think the folks who would be in these family literacy programs are exactly the kind of audience that they would want to reach. And so you sign up, you sign your child up, you're able to, or their child's able to select some broad categories, like, things that have to do with maybe science fiction or nature, various categories of preference that they might have. And then they'll get a book a month for the school year. Actually, I think it's October through June, and that's mailed to them. So this is a great opportunity. It's kind of hard to really do a family literacy program add-on, because the children are getting different books depending on their ages and so forth, and their preferences. But certainly in terms of getting books into the home and helping children start a home library, and getting families reading together, this is a great opportunity. So, and that's available right now and will continue to be available. So have your families sign up for that. English for Families is a brand new grant initiative through Florida Humanities, our nonprofit humanities organization, statewide organization here in Florida. I had a great conversation with their associate director, and this is an initiative that they're very excited about. It is focused on libraries, though. So for those of you who are library based, definitely want to check this out. So they're funding library-based programs using this English for Families model, and they actually provide the curriculum as well. This has been developed and field tested through Orange County Public Library System, and they're looking to roll this out as sort of a pilot project, but something that they want to build upon over time. So the initial grants are for $4,000. And I was told that they are looking to do at least one more round, and maybe beyond that. In the next round, I think the grants will be up to $8,000. So there's an opportunity here to get in on the ground floor of a new initiative that focuses on family literacy. And they do have sort of a programming model. I think it's based on sort of a 10-week semester. And then for us here at FLC, I'm happy to announce that we have, through the support of the Kislak Family Foundation, some planning grants that you all are the first to hear about. We're launching this right now, and so let me go over to that and share with you a little bit about that program. Okay. Can you all see my screen? Okay.
Yes, we can see
Okay.
it.
Good. So thanks to the generous support of the Kislak Family Foundation, we're able to make some grants available for $2,500 to support. Whoops, I think this is the wrong one, actually. I think I pulled up the wrong thing. Is this right? Let's see.
Greg, that is the wrong one.
I think is this right? This looks right.
No, it's the one in the chat is the correct one. I put it in the chat.
Okay. My apologies. Let me just pull this up here real quick. I had an earlier version I was working from, so sorry about that. Okay, here's the final version, which I think is essentially what I pulled up, but just to make sure that we're all working on the same page.
Yeah, it's
here.
almost exactly the same.
Yeah. So, okay, very good. So, the grants are for up to $2,500, and what they're really
Greg,
focused on.
we can't see we can't see the new link.
Oh,
that
you can't see
clicked.
the new link?
Yeah, I think you have to go back and share the new application.
Okay, just a second. Okay, can you see that now?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, okay, great. So the grants are essentially to provide some funding to engage in a planning process to either develop a new program or to significantly expand upon an existing program that you might have. And the Kislak Foundation recognizes that this kind of programming is a bit more complex than what we might traditionally find, in a more, in an adult ed setting, certainly. So because you're working with parents and children and doing shared parent-child activities, and you got a lot of other moving parts that you wouldn't have in a traditional program. Also because it really does lend itself to developing partnerships and collaboration. And this would give an opportunity to really go through a process where you're able to identify potential partners and work through how you can work together collaboratively. So, we know that planning takes time and resources. So we wanted to make some monies available. These are grants of up to $2,500 to support this effort. We're asking folks to have a planning process that's 5 months or less. And our application deadline is on July the 18th. We are working, we are asked, because there's a lot of different ways that folks define family literacy. And so the initiatives that we're interested in supporting through this program are family literacy programs that do include a parent adult basic education literacy, ESOL, or family literacy, or ESOL, or GED, I should say, instructional component. And there are programs out there that are, focused on children and may involve parents to some degree. But this really is a core element of the program, in addition to interactive activities between children and their parents, and then age-appropriate activities for children. And as you can see here, eligibility criteria, it is open to both a nonprofit and governmental organizations, both adult educators as well as those who primarily serve children in a preschool or early elementary school level. And the allowable expenditures, staff time, and other costs associated with doing the research, and conducting surveys of your students or community surveys. If you want to visit a program that is successfully operational, and you want to kind of do a little field trip, we can, that monies can be used for travel, certainly identifying funders and partners, anything that you feel is a reasonable cost associated with developing an action plan. So what we're going to do is, in terms of reporting, really at the end, the primary thing is to share your action plan. And then we're going to have several meetings with fellow grantees. FLC is here to support your effort and try to provide technical assistance and opportunities to network with other programs that are also engaged in this planning process, and then a little summary of how the funds were used. So we have 2 different applications, one for existing programs and one for the new programs. I'm going to go into the new program application here. Are you seeing the new program application?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Okay. So contact information, name, address, and so forth, whether you're eligible as a 501c3 or a governmental agency. You select the type of, we want to just, this is not your whole budget. We just want to know what your organizational budget amount is, or if you're a program that's part of a larger school district or community college, just what your adult education component is, or if you have a special initiative that's working with kids, that would go there as well. And then answering a series of questions, a little bit of a description on your organization or school, why you're interested in developing a family literacy program, the population that you're looking to serve, how you think that a planning grant will really help you in this developmental process. If you can speak a little bit about the role of community partners and potentially adult learners in your planning process. And we do encourage you to involve your adult learners and get some feedback. Jackie referenced that in one of the studies, and we're big proponents of, trying to go to the source and making sure that what you're building is going to be useful to the people who are being served. And so to the extent that you can get feedback from some of your learners who are already involved with your program, that would be fantastic, or potential learners. Briefly explaining the steps you'll take in your development process, and then sharing maybe a couple of different areas, questions, or challenges that you hope that this process will help you to resolve in terms of kind of researching and focusing in things that you can address in the planning process. Again, a lot of times programs will, a new grant opportunity will come out, and in my experience, there's a month or 6 weeks that you can respond, and people kind of scurry to kind of get a program together. And this will really provide an opportunity to really do a more deliberative process. The last item is just to provide an outline of what your plan will include. And these are just categories. We're not asking you to fill in that outline, because that's really the planning process piece, but just sort of what categories, and we have a template in there in terms of some categories that we're recommending, as well as a project budget. So that's sort of the long and the short of it in terms of this grant opportunity. And I'm also happy to share, and this is not, we haven't announced anything official, but we've been working with the Kislak Foundation on another grant, and we just got word, just very recently got word that they are interested in continuing their support and expanding on their support, and asked us what areas we'd be interested in maybe focusing on, and we suggested family literacy. And so we will be making, through their support, grants available probably early next year, December or January of next year, December of this year or January of next year, to support family literacy programs. And those will be grants of up to $10,000. So this process will be, if you're interested in doing this, of course, you'd have to apply for those other grants, but this would position you well, if you've gone through this process, to apply for the Kislak family literacy grants of program grants of $10,000. So I know I've put a lot out there with respect to sort of what we're doing here. Any questions with respect to the grant application or this opportunity?
Now, is this just for the state of Florida?
It is just for the state of Florida, yes. Other questions?
It sounds awesome, Greg.
Great. Thank you, Matt. Okay. Well, I don't know if I just presented it well, or it's just so new. I know there's a lot to process here. But you go through the guidelines. Nicole has put that in the chat, right, Nicole?
Yes, the guidelines are in the chat.
Okay. Are there any questions in the chat as well? Let me go look and see.
Don't think we have any right now.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Okay. So we do have a little resource document that we wanted to share that that references a number of organizations that are supporting family literacy. They have excellent resources like the National Center for Families Learning, some of them international. There's a national center there from Ireland, and we had a presenter at our conference last year when we were doing it remote. She remoted in and did a session for us. They do some really excellent work in Ireland. And then Jackie has also shared with us a bunch of resources in terms of articles from various journals and in several books on family literacy as well. Do you want to speak to that at all, Jackie?
No, I think that's fine, Greg. I think it's
Okay.
pretty straightforward there,
Yeah,
the list. Unless people have questions, feel free to reach out to me about,
Yeah.
any
And
sources.
Jackie's an excellent resource, on family literacy, and especially when it comes to the child education and development piece and pack time and so forth. So, she's, are you willing to field a question or two as people are starting to develop their programs, Jackie?
I am.
Okay.
So feel free to reach out.
Appreciate that. Okay. Well, if we don't have any further questions, why don't we go ahead and wrap it up? So please take advantage of this grant opportunity if you feel it's a good fit for your organization. And we'll have a review committee, an independent review committee looking at this. I want to thank the Florida Department of Education for all their generous support, including their support of this session, and their interest in family literacy as well. So is there anything else, Nicole, before we adjourn?
So I just wanted to remind everyone to fill out the survey. I put it in
Alright.
the chat. So if you could please fill that out. We use your feedback to make sure that our sessions are high quality. I will be sending a follow-up email with all the with the recordings and the information we had here today, along with the resource list and the grant guidelines page. I think that's all I have then, Greg.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, everyone. You have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Thanks, everyone. Best wishes.